It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. You're still with us on this Monday morning, a start to a brand new week. And as we are taking a deep focus on how far women have come in the South African workplace, we also need to gain a better understanding of the challenges and also the opportunities women are presented with. Now, joining us via video call to break this down is Professor Anita Bosch, who is an associate professor at University of Stellenbosch Business School for Women at Work, Organisational Behaviour and Leadership. Professor, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Happy to be with you.
It's so wonderful to chat to you, Professor. Let's start by looking at access to opportunities for women in, say, mid to higher powered and paying jobs. The question is, are women getting coveted positions as much as men are?
Well, I think worldwide the answer is no. So in South Africa also, no. There's around about 23% women in senior management, in top management, and then the level below that around about 33%, depending on what statistics you look at. So no, and not in terms of the number of economically active women in the population. Certainly, we're not doing good enough.
That's disheartening.
And that is sadly still the reality. But we have been contending, the gender pay gap. How prevalent is this in South Africa?
The gender pay gap, the statistics that you usually see in the newspaper, on the news, are based on econometric data. So that's not, it's an indication, and it gives us an indication of the patterns over years. So when you look at that, if you're in it depends where you're in the pay range. If you're in the midsection of the pay range, then the gap is likely to be anything between 23% and 35%. If you're in the very, very top level of the pay scales, the top percentile, the 90th percentile, there we've seen a broadening again of the gap between women and men, which should not be at all at that level. And then if you're at the very bottom of the pay distribution, then you'll see that the gap has actually started closing, and it's attributed to the basic minimum wage that has been introduced.
I think, Professor, when we have chats around pay gaps and gender equality in the workplace, one of the topics that tends to come up is that even in an instance where women are in high-powered positions, that they often feel like they don't receive enough support, or that they don't command as much respect, or don't get as much respect, as what their male counterparts would. Is that true in your findings in your case study?
Well, the reality is that some workplaces, not all, but the majority of workplaces are very, very masculine environments. Aspects, characteristics and traits that are valued are hyper-competitiveness, the idea that, that people should be available 24/7, that they're disembodied, that they don't have care obligations, which we know is not true of any man either. But those types of characteristics are valued in especially male-dominated industries. And so when a woman enters into the workplace, if she just displays the traits that she's learned over the years and been socialized into, she's likely to have a lot of a pushback. We refer to that as the double bind. You kind of have to be nice but also firm. Yeah. And if you're too firm, then that comes with its own consequences. So there's definitely a lot around masculinity and femininity, which resides in every human being, but you kind of have to adapt to what the environment requires of you, and that sometimes is a big barrier to women.
And I think that we do still have a long way to go, but I think just looking back at how far we've come, let's speak about the positive around this now that women are in power and commanding their space in a workforce in South Africa.
Yes, well, the reality is that as we always want to do these business cases, we want to say, well, put a number of women into the workplace, and if you do that, then you'll see a greater return on investment and so on. And there's many studies that do prove that. But I really want to say that irrespective of whether women then do add to the bottom line, we never ask this of men. So if a man's employed, we don't ask what's the business case, Is he going to improve the profit of the company? As though they kind of, men are the standard and women kind of have to be added only when there's a business case for it. So I think what's great about having more women is that they're more role models. A lot of young women growing up, know that this is possible for them. It also changes the workplace for men, not just in the negative. Some men kind of push back on this a lot and feel that their privileges are being taken away. But if we think about parental leave and the way in which workplaces have been structured so that care obligations are given greater levels of consideration. If we think about workplace flexibility, all of those have come on the back of women entering into the workplace and demanding more of this. And so it's good for both men and women when we enter into the workplace. There's also different ways of leading, and I don't want to essentialize because there are many women that are quite masculine in the way in which they lead. But in general, there's a level of care that gets introduced into the workplace. And when we see a tipping point, when there's more women, I'm hoping that this will also start manifesting. There's mixed results in studies around that, but I'm feeling positive that at least a greater level of private life will be introduced into the workplace and be normalized, and so that we don't end up with these separate worlds and kind of having to move between them.
Professor Anita Bosch, you are really such a gem. Thank you very much for all the work that you do with the University of Stellenbosch in that area of focus. This is fantastic, and this conversation obviously is so broad, would need an entire day, but I'm sure people can find a lot of your resources within the university's platforms. But thank you so much for sharing that insight, but also your time with us this morning.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
That was Professor Anita Bosch. I think it's encouraging to see the increasing surge of women who are really rising to the occasion and rising to the challenge and showing that actually they are the bosses in this regard and commanding that power. And it's so encouraging and so beautiful to see women really taking that space up and not only just waiting for the opportunity, but every day we're seeing such incredible women out there setting the tone, but also building those platforms. Salute.